an extra perspective that that, let's say, I brought in was my direct responsibilities at the NGO, working in advocacy, which means that I have everyday interactions with public authorities at both local and central level. And today I will try to speak a bit about these both perspectives related to how NGOs design, how anthropology can help NGOs design their programs, and also try to touch a bit upon how anthropology can help developing public policies. And I'm saying this from the perspective of also a soon-to-be civil servant, because I want to try the world and to see how this animal, after having studied so many years, studies from within. So I hope I'll be able to also bring in the public sector this perspective, also by continuing my studies in the future. I'll just briefly tell you a bit about how I ended up finding out about Anthropedia and this project actually. And it was basically, well, Facebook. I saw this post about how this new project of applied anthropology is born, and the first focus was on social inclusion. And that drew my attention immediately because working in social inclusion, I wanted to bring closer to my colleagues at the NGO the perspective of anthropology, because we live in this epistemic bubble at our NGO, always working with actors from social sector, NGOs, and of course the public sector, but never had the opportunity to engage with research in a more, let's say, from a more reflective perspective. And well, I discussed with the team, and in the end, we managed to bring them in on our premises, and that was quite innovative. And I mean, when I told my colleagues that I would bring some anthropologists, some artists, a team of anthropologists and artists at our offices, they seemed very, very reluctant, because it was for them a new, exactly bringing in this new public who could maybe question the way some of the activities were designed, but also at the same time they were curious to see an outside perspective. So just shortly about this experience, we had, they found it very useful at the end. Some of them even told me, my colleagues I mean, it's very interesting to have some people actually listen to your narrative so attentively. And I guess this is what anthropologists do, right? They sit, listen, observe, and try to understand without criticizing, without judging. And my colleagues felt very, in a way, they were filled of this observation that they felt from the team, from the visiting team. At the same time, this reluctance stayed with them, because let's say at the end, when some of the I would call them deliverables, because the team wrote some articles, they drafted some sketches on the activity, because the idea was to try to find a solution to one of our organization's problems. And let's say that some of the perspectives that were brought by the team of artists and anthropologists were a bit outside the knowledge and expertise zone of what my colleagues used to work with for a very long time. And that's when maybe there were doubts about really understanding the depths and of such complex programs, which involves social assistance, which involves different types of counseling, and actually having the experience of working with vulnerable people for such a long time. But in the end, they brought some solutions that are actually even discussed now within the teams. And interestingly, some of the aspects were even thought of by my colleagues before, but they had never or barely put them in practice because of a lack of time and because of this luxury of trying to sit a bit and reflect upon the way the NGO does the things. Because I'll give you a complete example. We have this social professional integration program, right? And its purpose is to follow the person, let's call it the beneficiary, from first time of entering our NGO until the end, which can be after 2 or 3 years. And one of the main objectives is to raise the motivation and self-respect of the person. Now, some of the teams try to figure out a bit more what the organization exactly does to understand what actually motivates a person. How do you build the trust of that person towards the program and vice versa? And there were small things that maybe seem quite self-explanatory, but in practice maybe they weren't implemented yet, such as let's give some small incentives like well done, or just try to integrate the person, the beneficiary, in the space of that program, in the space of how you design the program actually. And that's something I also kind of discovered while doing my own master thesis research on this, with this applied anthropology, through this lenses, applied anthropology lenses. What else? I guess, yeah, I think I can just tell you a bit now about my master thesis research, because it's closely linked to this. I studied the way 3 NGOs, out of which one of them being Ateliere, fără, Frontiere, constructed their own programs for the beneficiaries, and I tried to understand the relationship that the organization builds with the beneficiaries, and vice versa, and the role the beneficiary does play in the design of the programs. In a sense, trying to understand the type of impact that the NGO wants to have in the beneficiary's life, and that, for me, was done by looking at different practices that the organization has, and the way the expectations are built as well, but also the way different spaces of trust are created. And why this was important for me and for the research, and now going back to the main idea of why anthropology is important for the ways NGOs design their programs, is that in the end, this type of research, very applied research, can actually help improve and evaluate the experience of the beneficiary. For example, looking at the spaces that you have in the NGO where especially for those NGOs who work on the field with the beneficiaries directly in a program such as ours, where they come in our on our premises, they stay there every day. So how is that space built for them? How do they perceive the space? Is it safe enough? Does it give a sense of belonging? Does it give a sense of lack of prejudice? And then also definitely evaluating and analyzing the programs per se. Are they fit for purpose? Do they have at the center of the way they're built, the understanding of the why and how and all that? And again, because anthropology can have that luxury of reflection, which sometimes NGOs do to their workload and having to constantly struggle for money. Not that the anthropology sector doesn't have to do that, but also something that doesn't allow them to have actually. And even it helps within the NGOs. Sometimes it can help figure out the tensions, the internal relations, the culture of the organization, so to say, and the relationship inside and externally. Some of the results were that there are indeed tensions that can appear between how the NGO perceives the beneficiary, for example, and how the beneficiary wants to be perceived by the organization. Because most of the time, the beneficiary, person who comes from a vulnerable background, has built over time some coping mechanisms that are very much different from what the NGO would expect from the person when it comes to integration. Let's say, how is integration understood by the NGO compared to how it's understood by the person? What does success mean for NGO compared with what it means for the beneficiary? And that is maybe a very important tension which can sometimes help the people in the NGO understand a bit better the people they work for in the end. And yeah, well, this again, does it actually respond to the identity of the person? Does it respond to its reactions, to their actual needs? And in which way does the NGO actually try to understand the motivation of the beneficiaries? Sometimes everyone has their own prejudices, everyone has their own principles, values. Of course, we're built out of society, the way our experiences build the way we think, and it's not like in anthropology where you really have to be careful with that bias that you bring in your own research, whereas in NGOs maybe that bias is a bit more is a bit more visible perhaps, because there can be people who are not necessarily in the NGO for the mission it has. Sometimes they can be there just for a good work environment and not necessarily thinking of the good behind. And very importantly, again, this space that is being, this connection, let's say, NGOs work with indicators. They need to tick certain boxes. They need to do reports. They need to answer to the funders' needs and expectations, which again sometimes can make them forget about the initial importance of their work, and again not allowing them to enter this actual reflection. And again, a very practical example, when it comes to the idea of work, because I mentioned social professional integration, so people trying to integrate people on the labor market. And this comes with the question, most of the people are not motivated to work, right? When they come at the organization, or they say they are, but in the end they're not. What type of indicators does the NGO take into account when assessing that motivation? Does it go beyond the yes, no, I don't know, or does it go a bit deeper into trying to understand the whole systemic, let's say, environment of that? And that's something that I explored in my research. For example, does the NGO in that sense look at the relationship of Romanians in general with work, with what work actually entails, or with the values of what a person thinks or believes work represents, all the different hierarchies, motivation, and again, how do we assess the real desire for change? Right? It's again going back to the concepts, to the words I mentioned earlier. How do we perceive integration? How do we perceive success, etc., etc. Something valuable I noticed about in both the ways that anthropology and NGOs construct their perspectives. I believe they both have this human-centered approach when designing both the research and the programs. There's also this lack of prejudice, well, in different ways, but it's still there. But at the same time, they are again quite far away on other aspects, because in the end, NGOs work in social inclusion. They aim for social change in the end, and not just in social inclusion. While anthropologists, they try to alter as less as possible the social environment that they work in. And that's something that is valuable for anthropology in the future, maybe, and starting now. How much can it advocate for all the good things that come out of the research? Also, NGOs are always looking for fast results. They work in tight time frames, while anthropology needs time to understand the subjects, to understand the perspectives, and that sometimes can be quite unbalanced. And also, NGOs have they see the reality from this programmatic point of view. They need to design program. They see a problem, they design a program, and it's not necessarily from the perspective of the relationship or the behavior of certain actors. Well, I mean, that being said, I guess just to conclude now on some points on why it's good to have anthropology involved in the ways programs design, the NGOs design their programs. It really helps understand the rejections, I guess, by different groups of society to certain measures. Particularly when we talk about vulnerable groups, who most of the time can be reluctant and distrustful towards programs created by NGOs, but also by policies in general. They can really create safe spaces and sense of belonging, the self-respect, which are very important for Romanian society. And trying to explore these aspects a bit more in both worlds can really complement on this. Why do people behave in a certain way? Why do they choose certain things? And of course, when you think of a program that really helps focusing on what is actually needed. Something really interesting also is to understand what anthropology can also help understand the way and is well positioned to understand the space within which NGOs operate, which can be completely different in a society such as Romania compared to a society in the western part of Europe. And as I was saying, they can also be advocates. There is this author Samson who is looking at the NGOization as a concept, and basically in which way NGOs operate. Are they becoming bureaucratic, such like the state? Are they becoming closer to what a company looks like? This outside their general discourse on social justice and etc., etc. And it really can help NGOs reflect on their own action, better understand their target groups, the logic of power and hierarchies, and the relationships between certain groups that they operate with, and again the practices that they have in place. And it's very interesting to use the anthropology methodology for documenting programs. And now, just concluding with the main point on public policy, also for documenting public policy. And most of the time when I go and meet decision makers, and I actually went to meet one last week at the Ministry of Labor and Social Solidarity. We were talking again, we ended up in this big debate on why the let's say prejudiced Romanians don't work. And I tried to bring in the anthropological perspective. And the person was a bit, not amazed, but it looked like it was the first time that she was put in the front of trying to reflect that from a different perspective. And every time I try to do that with people from central authorities, particularly, it seems that they are so far away from what anthropology is meant to bring closer to your eyes, closer to your heart, closer to everything. And I hope this is something that will change in the future. I hope I will be able to, myself, from my new position in the future, to change this and see more anthropology and more anthropologists engage with public sector and vice versa, and with NGOs and vice versa. And with this, thank you.